Chapter 21. Sunday early evening. Doreen called Mac. As soon as he picked up, he said in exasperation, "I haven't had a chance to look up any of those names yet." "Steve was just in my house," she snapped. "He stole his folder." There was a short silence before Mac responded. "Did you catch him?" "He jumped my neighbor's fence, but I did call out to him and told him that I had scanned it all. He damn near fell on his face at that." "Damn," he said. "Are you sure it was Steve?" "He had on a black hoodie, but it was his body shape. I haven't checked if there are any footprints." "I suppose I should have done that first," she said, reaching up to pinch the bridge of her nose. "That was foolish of me." "Hang on. I'm coming over right now," Mac said. "Did you finish scanning all those files?" "Yes, I did." And he didn't grab the things I had removed from his file, pages I had set off to the side. "I was researching those this morning. They were upside down with paper clips on them." He just grabbed his folder and ran. "But now he'll know what you know," Mac said. "And that could be bad news." "Well, he won't know about the stuff I removed from his file. But maybe he'll wonder if there's more," Doreen said. "Because he found one folder, that doesn't mean it was the only one. You just have a nose for getting into trouble, don't you? Are you already in the truck and driving over here? If you're not, I'm walking over to my neighbor's." "I'm in the truck," he said. In the background, she heard an engine start up. She smiled. "Good. I still have to get to that thrift store and empty my car." "You haven't done that yet? You could have done that instead of getting into trouble," he snapped. "And what if I'd been here when Steve came?" More silence again. She smiled triumphantly. "See? Maybe it's a good thing I wasn't here." "Where were you? If you saw him leaving your house, where were you that you didn't see him enter?" "I went for a walk up the creek," she announced. "How far up the creek?" he asked suspiciously. She frowned into the phone. "Just a little ways." "How far up the creek?" he barked. "Up to Steve's place," she said. And then added hurriedly, "But I didn't see him until later as he ran by, and he didn't see me." "It's a pretty damn big coincidence if he snuck into your house when you were at his. How is it you didn't see him?" She explained what happened. "That makes sense." "Sure," she said. "That's when he almost fell because I told him how I had scanned everything. And that'll just have him coming back wondering if you have a hard drive with it all. But surely he'll expect me to put it in cloud storage, or to at least email it to myself. That's what anybody would do." "Which means you're now a bigger threat than ever," Mac said morosely. She was still talking when she heard Mac's truck. She stepped out the front door with the critters, and waited until he pulled up in front of her door. She went to the big garage door and lifted it, realizing that once again she hadn't locked that either. Mac hopped out and said, "What are you doing in there?" She shook her head. "I realized I can now park in my garage." "But you came here for something else." She walked over so she could see where Steve had jumped and pointed. "He went over the fence here." "I wonder why he didn't go around the fence," he said, looking around. "I see the reporters are gone." "Of course they are, now that they'd be useful." She motioned at the fence. "This is only 4 feet tall. Someone like Steve, who's pretty tall, can jump this easily. I'm sure he didn't think anything of it." "Maybe," Mac said. He walked over and up into the neighbor's lawn, and checked the garden for footprints. "It's all bark mulch. No footprints to find here." He carried on across the front yard, and over to the other side. Doreen hadn't met anybody in that house yet. Cindy and her kids were in the next house, but nobody came out when Mac wandered around that house's fences. Mac shook his head when he came back and said, "No forensic evidence to show he was here." "Of course not," Doreen said. "Just the fact that he was in my house. And she looked at him and frowned. I don't think he was wearing gloves. You don't think he was wearing gloves, Max said. Or you know he wasn't wearing gloves. She cast her mind back, but it was hard to confirm. All she remembered was him wearing black. Her shoulders sagged and she said, he probably did have gloves on. Yes, he probably did, he said. She led the way back into the kitchen and pointed to where the file had sat on the table. So, if he went into the kitchen and was looking around, it would have been right there, available for him, correct? Mac asked. She nodded. It's a good thing I finished all that scanning. She picked up the pages that were flipped over and handed them to him. These are the ones I found interesting in that folder. These are newspaper articles about the 3 different house fires and the women getting checks. These 3 men were part of an opposing gang. Frowning, Mac grabbed the papers from her. Do I have copies of this stuff? Yes, in the digital file I sent to you. Although the file was big, so it's one of those Google link things you have to click to download. He nodded. I'll make sure I download it. But run me a paper copy of these too, will you? She took off the paper clips, went to her printer, and made copies. With the copies clipped together, she handed them to Mac and said, these are the ones I think are important. For all I know, there's more too, because there's no mention of the Helmsman fire here. So that's another case. Mac nodded. I'll start on it Monday when I go in. Good, Doreen said. I'm sure I can stay alive until then. She waved her hand airily at him. At that, he fisted his hands on his hips and glared at her. She smirked. Also, I'm trying to find a Veronica Phillips. Her father passed away back in 1901, according to his death certificate. She apparently was the daughter of the lady who wrote these love letters and who owned the Hope chest boxes. So, do you think they were married? They were married just before he had to leave again, she said. I'm not sure what his job was, but he got sick after he left. Then he died. But they still got married, so the Hope chest was used? I don't think she ever had time to get it unpacked, Doreen said. Just time enough to get pregnant. Which we well know often happens on the wedding night if not before, Max said quietly. I don't know if I recognize that name. I'll have to take a look and see if I can find something on it. That would be good. A lot of names are flying around and I've jotted down some notes, but it's a little confusing. You have a bunch of stuff you're dealing with too, he said. Then he caught sight of the plastic bin with the newspaper clippings. He frowned, picked them up and said, and what's all this about? A friend of Nan's, she announced. She collected all these, and apparently, some of them deal with a serial killer from way back then, Bob Small. His eyebrows shot up and he turned to look at her. What about him? She looked at him in interest. So that's a name you know. He nodded. He was a notorious serial killer in Vancouver many years ago. He was caught for a couple things and did time, but was never caught for the murders. Only after DNA identification evolved was he linked to some colder cases. Does anybody know if he's still alive? No idea, Max said. That's just one of the mysteries of the case. Of course, Doreen said. Well, those I found in that closet full of paperwork. This house is just full of stuff to keep you busy, isn't it? Mac asked. Why don't you focus on that and leave Steve alone? You're prodding a dangerous tiger there. If he comes out of hiding, it'll be lethal. Maybe, but I'm definitely getting the impression it's not so much dangerous to me, as maybe someone close by is dangerous to him. Explain. You already explained it, she said. There's a chance somebody else knows this information is slowly being exposed. And they may stop Steve from talking. Just as likely they're afraid he'll let something loose, Max said, absent-mindedly flipping through the papers in his hands. This is a big deal. You can't go playing around with this. Wasn't planning on it, Doreen said. Steve wouldn't matter to me in the least except for that darn gun. If you would at least get the ballistics checked on it, we could see if it was used in any other cases. You'll get hurt or worse, killed. We, he said with emphasis, are waiting for ballistics to come back. I might hear by Monday or Tuesday, but chances are good it will take longer. Perfect, because I've got a hunch it'll be a whole lot more than we expect. It shouldn't be. That would be foolish for Steve to use a gun directly linked to him or the gang, or to several outstanding murder or B&E cases. She snorted at that. Did you ever know a smart criminal? He nodded. Bob Small. That man was very smart if he did even half of what we're afraid he's done. He's eluded law enforcement for decades. We don't even know the scope of the crimes he's committed. How many killings are attributed to him? Mac shrugged. He was a long-haul trucker. I don't think we'll ever know half of his victims. But out of Vancouver alone, which was one of his main bases, we figured about 32. Her jaw dropped. 32 murders unsolved. How come the public doesn't know about this? Because it was a long time ago. And I mean a long time ago. Law enforcement doesn't generally bring up things that far back. Not too many people are still left alive who even remember. But some are, she said. And I'm sure many family members of those poor victims are involved too. Which is exactly why it popped up again, Mac said. Popped up again? She asked curiously. Remember that we go through cold cases on a regular basis? Well, that one came up in discussion with the new genealogy cold cases. Genealogy. She frowned. Is that new way of finding family members of somebody? Yes, but it's a fairly new science. Of course, genealogy is old, and DNA is by now fairly commonplace. But to find the genealogy tree within the DNA? That's an interesting prospect, and it certainly narrows down the field. That's where we got a hit on Bob Small. She stared at him, then whispered, that is an awful lot of cases. Too many, he said. I'll handle Steve and Bob Small. You go find your Veronica. She glared at him. That's like telling the little woman to stay home, where she'll be safe and sound. He leaned forward and said, that's exactly what I'm telling you to do. Stay home where you'll be safe and stop getting into trouble. What you really mean is, stop interfering in what you consider your cases, she snapped. He chuckled. Exactly. If you decide to go into law enforcement, I can tell you the training is pretty rough. You might still be alive by the time you get through it all, but it'll probably drive you crazy, because you don't get to work on any real cases for a long time. She shook her head. It sounds boring. I think I'll continue doing what I'm doing. These cold cases, a lot of them are so old they are public knowledge. I can dig as much as I want. The smile wiped off his face. You might, but you won't survive every attack. You've been hurt enough as it is. I have, she said. So I'll have to be smarter about it. I was hoping you'd be on my side, she said in a wheedling tone. I have helped you a lot. He just glared and said, no blackmail. Of course not. I'll just see if I can get Nan's help. Oh no. That needs to stop too. But a lot of people from Rosemore have good information. Just look at all the boxes I got from Solomon. Do you know how much information is in there? Information that could have been lost if those boxes hadn't landed on my doorstep? Literally? He closed his eyes and she could almost see his lips move, probably counting to 10. Finally, he opened his eyes again and said, bottom line is, you have to stay safe. Bottom line is, I've been safe so far. Everybody has come to my rescue. I won't expect it every time, but I can't walk away and turn my back on all these cases. He glared at her, speechless. She nodded. So it's really in your best interest to help me. That way, I won't get into as much trouble, and we close these cases faster. Then she added in a smug tone, and you won't have to worry about what I'm up to. I want you to take tomorrow off, he said quietly. Monday completely off. Read a book, sit by the creek, do something that isn't criminally related. Let Steve calm down too. Can you do that? She stared at him. Why? Because everyone needs to take a break. Even you. Step back. Relax. Clear your head. Tuesday you will think better and faster. There was some sense to his words, but she looked at all the information she wanted to go through and opened her mouth to argue, but he placed a gentle hand on her arm. Please. Just for tomorrow. Then he added, unless of course you can't handle that? Her head lifted, immediately geared up to accept that dare, that challenge, and she glared at him. Of course I can. Good, he said. I'll hold you to it. Darn him anyway. She was caught and she knew it.